Hi, I'm Kevin Wright. I'm the owner of Fan Insights, and we publish the Fan Engagement Index, and we run the Fan Engagement Network. You can find out more on faninsights.co.uk. Something I wanted to do was just to quickly address something that's come up this week around fan engagement, and it's a slightly different thing to what we normally deal with and what I normally deal with, which is fan engagement in terms of the relationship between fans and clubs. Um, Instead, I wanted to briefly look at the relationship between fans and leagues. And the things that have provoked that this week have been number one, a conversation between myself and Ryan McKnight, who's the former editor of FC Business Magazine, and also a Newcastle United fan about the takeover that hasn't happened yet at the club. And we were talking with that fan about how the rules work, how they're formulated, the fact that clubs have such a big involvement in the rule book and creating it. And the second sort of event, second issue, was the publication of both statements from the EFL and the Premier League on Friday the 24th of July about the restart. And those statements, neither of them mentioned fans. Now, I texted someone who's had a long period of very senior management in the football industry, and suggested that was something of a drop ball. I thought it was quite a serious error to omit that a group to omit fans, and they agreed it was a drop ball. Neither myself nor that other person believed it to be malign. I just don't think that's evidence with the relationships that you see in football now between the FSA, their delegated members that attend meetings, with the EFL, the National League, the Premier League. I think the culture is in very much the right direction. But it just raised this issue of communication more generally with fans and what might be termed universal transparency, if you will. Now, if I explain it in terms of how fan engagement works in clubs normally, there are lots of different levels of engagement. And one of those will be the very close relationship between the Supporters Trust or the Independent Supporters Organisation, independent group of fans, and the club. And that is a very common thing. It's a very good thing because it provides a level of insight, and quite often a club can have that relationship with an independent group, and that group can almost kind of often think things that are difficult for the club to think and work through issues. It can only be a think tank in a sense for the football club. It's how for the club. It's often how I've framed it when I've talked about it, and that's it's a good position for a club to be in. If you look at someone like a Spurs and the Spurs Trust, or Fulham and the Fulham Supporters Trust, and any number of others. The second sort of level of relationship is the second tier, if you want to call it that, is the Fans Parliament. The Fans Parliament's a great way of having a slightly wider group of people, not just from one organisation, but a series of representatives who give you a decent idea of what some of the big critical issues are, maybe on a match day. They may be to do with wider issue, bigger issues than just that. Could do with the stadium, what have you. You'd have your Independent Supporters Association or group or Supporters Trust on that, alongside people in different stands, or Liverpool have a sort of home fans representative as well as having international fans in there, and all sorts of things. And you will have BAME representatives and LGBT representatives, and perhaps disabled, and in some cases you might have kids represented in there, because you've all got all these different voices and different layers in a club. It's important to be able to hear from these people and to listen to them, and also for them to be able to you to be able to communicate things with them. The sort of the final, if you like, layer of dialogue in any club is that of the universal communication, universal transparency, if you will. So the universal forms of dialogue. So what you might look at, particularly, you might look at fans forums, the like of which, for example, Brighton and Forest Green Rovers do. Paul Barber's someone who is the deputy chairman and chief executive of Brighton. is very keen on that. And I remember when I interviewed him for my diploma in public relations several years ago, before I'd set Fan Insights up. We were talking about that and how they present information in a very open fashion. It's partly down to the history of Brighton and Hove Albion, and what the fans went through, and the sorts of things they never found out about what was going on, particularly around finances, that led to them leaving the Goldstone and having to go and play at Gillingham. Forest Green, further down, are a club that do a lot of fans forums as well, and their owner meets fans that way, and that's a good system, because it demonstrates, it's kind of like whites of the eyes sort of stuff, and people can see the people in charge and hear the people in charge and hold them to scrutiny. But as I say, in some senses, on its own, it's not enough, just like the close relationship on its own is not enough. And then in other forms of dialogue, obviously you've got online, and Twitter's a particular thing, and outside of the marketing communications channels, and by that I mean the sort of normal Twitter handles that a club has, where it's about pushing out information. It might be about, selling to some degree, that kind of thing, and pushing information out. You would ideally, alongside that, either have a general club marketing club dialogue channel like Leicester, Man City do it, or you have the SLO running it, or another Brighton, Bristol Rovers, for example. Tom Gorringe, their commercial director, he does dialogue through his handle, his Twitter handle, and that's great. That's a good form of dialogue. And so these are all things that sort of allow us to see the people in charge and put them under a bit of scrutiny and ask them some questions and be reassured. I think a lot of it is about, it's not about having the right to ask lots of questions and placing the owners or the people in charge under pressure because we believe they're not telling us the truth. It's more about giving people reassurance. And I think the job of any organisation, if we switch back now to the sort of EFL and Premier League and the National League and the FA, but particularly the leagues, a lot of the role that dialogue plays in that context is reassurance. And if what you're doing is pursuing these very close relationships, then whilst that's very important, it's a very specific form of fan engagement. It's a very specific form of dialogue. And most of us are not going to be have that level of in interest or investment in the game, because most of us don't want to be representatives of the fan base, or nationally or in our own clubs. Most of us just want to watch football. It's the reason all of us, including myself, it's the reason all of us started going to football, because A, your club was local, or you had some association with it, or whatever, and B, you love watching football. So in these positions, what organisations in all sorts of sectors and industries do, and this applies to football and it applies to, I think, rugby league, rugby union, cricket, other areas, is they have to volunteer that transparency, that engagement. It's important for them to do it, partly because it's a reassurance to people, partly because, like the guy last week, you can explain things about regulation and how some of these things work. It reduces friction and tension, because although you will always be criticised, and I do often feel a great deal of sympathy for the people running the game in this particular context, but also clubs, but in this context, the game, people running leagues, they, I think, could help reduce the friction a bit sometimes by being a bit more sort of open and engaging in some of this wider dialogue, the universal transparency, if you like. So the form it might take will actually, in some cases, already exists or has been done. The EFL, although it was slightly, kind of hand-picked group, or it was done through clubs, some years ago ran a series of forums all over the country about refereeing. I happened to attend one. I got an invite as a fan of my own club of Wimbledon, and they were grand. They were really good because refereeing's an area which is it's really difficult, A lot of us don't understand the rules, and especially when you get these changes and offside rule and that kind of thing. I think particularly it was around issues of the offside rule, and some changes that have been brought in the close season, and it really helped to just sort of get people to think about that area, and gave them the chance to ask some questions and hear from someone who knew what they were talking about. I think it was the head of the referee of the professional game referees, professional match game referees, or whatever they're called. So that was really good. Now, obviously, I'm talking about wider forms of communication dialogue. You know, what are sort of hand-picked forums might not be quite the right form, but you know, and you're not going to, you're not going to hire Wembley Stadium and plonk Richard Masters and Rick Parry and Mike Tattersall in the middle of the pitch and have fans ask questions. But we have this thing called social media. We have online. You know, and with some filtering and management, you could have sessions with these people. And I think it would, you know, I think a lot of what the problem with leadership is, you are often, you know, kind of hidden away from, you know, from the ordinary person whose decisions, you know, your decisions affect them, and you can be hidden away. And also, you know, I do think being exposed to the people who, at the end of your decisions, are affected by them, and quite often profoundly affected by them, can help you to make better decisions in the longer term. I just think that's part of what fan engagement does. Is it helps leadership to understand the people they're making decisions on behalf of, or you know, the people who are most affected by the decisions. And it's a good thing to make a better decision. I don't think there's ever an argument about that. If you had the chance to make a better decision by engaging in dialogue with someone, you engage in dialogue with someone and you make a better decision. So the instincts are there. Some of the models already exist. We have tools like online. We have the ability to reach millions of people. It's not beyond the wit of anyone to set up a Q&A session for people like Richard Masters and Rick Parry, Mike Tattersall, possibly even, you know, Greg Clark or someone like that. And I think it would be really a really interesting thing to do. I think it would be a really effective thing. I think it would create, as I said, reassurance, which is what a lot of fan engagement is about. It's assuring people that they're making the right decisions. And I think would reduce some of the tension, some of the mystery that simply doesn't, when you look behind the mystery, the intrigue, there simply isn't an issue there.